Hey everyone, welcome back to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by the Yo Pro Know. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of the Yo Pro Know, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to hire, develop, and retain the top young professional talent, starting with the young professionals that you work with. There's a lot of young professional fish in the sea, as I like to say, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. Today, I am so excited to have Sam Reid join us. We're so happy you're here. A population health management leader and well-being strategist at Cobbs Allen, an independent risk management and insurance brokerage firm. Sam joins us from Greenville, South Carolina. One of our Yo Pro Know team members, Jade, encouraged me to connect with Samantha. And after I initially spoke to her, I realized her knowledge in the space of wellness and employee well-being was an incredible resource to our audience and one that is highly, highly in demand right now. By now, our audience knows I love bringing Furman grads on the show. Go Dins. So please welcome another one this week. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Really excited you're here. We're going to dive in to some lightning round questions, and then we're going to dive into the meat of the discussion today, which, again, very excited to have you because you're the first person who we've brought on the show to talk about this in a really kind of deep dive. So I'm just really pumped that you're here. So first, this lightning round, tell us something that is not on your resume. So something people would not know by looking at a piece of paper.
Well, I think just from a professional standpoint, I spent some time in retail.
Okay.
And so one thing that's not on my resume is that I spent some time in the retail world.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably, when I think back at all my jobs that I've had, learned the most about people in that job.
Yeah.
And I've had some very interesting jobs in my career so far. So there's that. And then, I'll also say that I'm a runner, used to be a runner.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty determined individual and have trained and completed a few marathons and half marathons. And I think that is indicative of, in the work life being determined within your career.
Yeah.
So.
I, for one, think that you should put the retail jobs on your resume because that tells a lot about a person.
Yeah.
And I would say pretty positive things.
Yes.
All right. Next one. What is your favorite productivity tool?
So I'm a little old school when it comes to this. I am a handwritten to-do list girl. So I actually really like the process of writing down what I need to do and then highlighting it when I'm done. It's very prideful when you can highlight things and show what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
I actually have kept all of my to-do list notebooks, and I go back sometimes to former jobs just to see what I was working on 10 years ago, and it brings a sense of pride.
That's really cool. I'm like a hard copy planner girl, and
Same.
That's where I have my to-dos. And yes, I still have my Google Calendar, but for whatever reason, it's just like checking it off. Feels really good.
Yes.
So I feel that. Can you tell us about a lesson that you learned as a young professional?
There's two, if you don't mind. The first one, I was a very young manager. I managed a team of 15 individuals and was very young, made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot of lessons. One of the ones I learned was from my manager at the time, and it was around body language and just how much we communicate without verbally communicating was something that I didn't do well when I was early on. Arms crossed and less engaged in who I was talking to. And my manager just said, "You're going to be a natural leader one day, but I want you to lead with encouragement and inspiration versus intimidation." And so I would encourage everyone out there to just watch their body language and make sure you're showing it in a way that's engaging. And I think the other is, as a very young professional, I did some behavioral analyses like the DISC profile and Enneagram versus more the personality testing. And it just proved to me that I am who I am. I don't need to change, but that I can adapt to other individuals. And that lesson of adaptation versus changing was huge for me as a young leader and a young professional. So thank you for humoring me with two things. But
Thank you. No, that's great. And then last on this lightning round is, what is your preferred communication style? So speaking of adapting, we talk a lot at Yo Pro Know with our clients and our audiences about communication preferences and how it does differ when we look across generations. So I have to always ask my guest, what is your preferred communication style?
So I think, and I was thinking about this, I am much more of an email text girl. It takes me some time to process information. And so if I can process at my own pace and then respond appropriately, read through my responses, make sure they're appropriate for what's being asked. I do like my one-on-one time with my manager so I can talk through any feedback they have for me, any new projects I need to be working on. But email text, I think, is is my method that I like the most.
Awesome. Well, thank you for indulging me in the lightning round. Now let's dive into the meat of our discussion today. But first, give us a little bit more background on you, just high level that we didn't include in our introduction, like maybe a little bit more about the company, the work that you do every day, and then we'll dive more into that.
Sure. So like you said, Cobbs Allen is a independent, privately held organization. I am in the health and benefits arm of the organization. So we help, this is a very appropriate conversation because this is what I help my clients with is understanding generationally, population-based, how these clients function, what industries they're in, what their demographics are, and then really help with, a 3-part strategic process of discovering using qualitative and quantitative data, driving that strategy. So discovering and then strategizing and then evolving the program as things come up, i.e. Great Resignation, COVID-19, and then helping them with that strategy along the way. And that includes strategizing and discussing their benefit plan and how we can engage better, retain employees, attract, everything we're talking about today with that young generation especially. My role specifically is the subject matter expert in population health management and well-being. So I'm really looking at the lens of employee engagement within the workplace and outside the workplace, how individuals can feel their full self, healthy, happy, and a lot of time with these younger generations, a lot of that is in the workplace now. They find their identity through the purpose they have in their work. And so that's also what I help my clients with is understanding that, drilling into the data and figuring out the most strategic and innovative and meaningful benefits and well-being programs for them.
Great. Well, I mean, it's probably no surprise to our listeners and viewers, again, why we wanted you on the show, because we are very data-driven here at YoPro. And so having experts come in who can really shed light into more of what we're doing from a holistic view, right? Not just young professionals. Of course, we want your thoughts on young professionals, but you are an expert in this space from a very high level as well. So we're really excited to have you. As you know, we are talking about the young professional generation today. So that's our Gen Z and millennials that make up the 21 to 39 range. Obviously, when we talk about future of the workforce, we are looking at the high schoolers, the college students that are rising into this workforce in the coming years. And so help us set the stage by talking about what these two massive generations look like as both employees in your field and also in your clients' workspaces. So you have an interesting perspective of working with your clients, but also your own team at Cobbs Allen.
Yep. So I think for these two groups, there was a Deloitte study, and since you're data driven, I figured I'd pull in a study or two here, that these generations want to be empowered to make a difference, and it's a little bit different when we think about. And Johns Hopkins also wrote an article around just the difference between the generations, and one of the things that stood out there was that I'll call our elder wise generations are those that are, when they're at work, they're doing their work and it's very task oriented and task driven. Whereas our younger generations, our younger populations are trying to find purpose in the workplace. They're trying to find a place that is meaningful for them. And so that is probably the biggest difference that I've looked at in the research and just in talking to my clients. So I think that would be it. I think that would be those two differences there.
Yeah. Have you noticed any trends or any differences among just the generations in your own office or among your clients? Is that something that you ever have like a front row seat to? Yes.
And I think one of the things I've done for the last few jobs that I've had in my career is to look at my clients under that generational lens. One thing, then you'll hear me say it quite a bit during this podcast, is around employee listening and inventorying benefits and well-being programs. That is what I do for my clients is I look at their complete benefit package, their well-being initiatives, everything they're doing internally under the lens of the pillars of well-being. So not just physical, but emotional, financial, social, community, purpose, career, you name it. But then also what their demographics are. What's the average age of the employer? If their average age is in the 30s, that's a pretty young population. So then looking under the benefits under that lens. And this is something that employers can do now. They can also ask their brokerage partner to help with. But I think that is how I help, is come in and look under those different discovery type lenses, making sure that those are meaningful benefits, somebody who's 65 and is going on Medicare and is about to retire, they need something different than a 24-year-old right out of college or grad school who may be looking to buy their first home. So there's stressors with both, and there's things that they need for both.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the direction that we want to take, and a really great segue to this next question. So thank you for that. As you know, we have an ongoing survey going on right now. It's our 2024 YoPro survey. We're trying to survey 10,000 current and future young professionals across the country in a national level. In our initial results, we're seeing a very large emphasis placed on wellness and benefits. And again, you are the expert in this space, so help us understand what opportunities are out there for companies looking to offer better benefits and well-being offerings.
And I like how you phrased that question, because truly when you look at benefits and well-being, sometimes we talk about them as mutually exclusive, but in reality, benefits lead to well-being for individuals. If they feel like they're supported with their benefits, they're going to be happier, healthier individuals in the workplace and outside the workplace. When you flip that around, well-being is a benefit. And so I think it's really important to understand for especially the decision makers within an employer base, the HR representatives, the benefits managers, et cetera, that we are not talking about two different things. We're talking about very, very mutually inclusive aspects of an organization, benefits and well-being. I would say that, three things that come to the top of mind that if I could leave today that I would hope that people leave with are leveraging benefits. A lot of clients think that they have to have, which sometimes is the case, they have to have more when it comes to benefits. But in reality, if we just take a look at what benefits are already in place, it becomes very apparent that those benefits already have things that are very useful for employees. And if I may, I'll give an example.
Please.
So when you look at a 401k partner or an employee assistance program, so a mental health partner for an employer, a lot of times clients sign the dotted line, great, we have it, check the box. But in reality, that 401k vendor also offers financial consultation. The EAP offers legal consultation and will preparation. So it's how can we get to know our partners that we have now, but then also how do we listen to our employees for future benefits? So first one is inventory benefits. Second is employee listening. It's a very inexpensive way to find out what motivates the population, what the population is needing in terms of their benefit and well-being plan, and it's just a very meaningful thing to do, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't have to be this 45-minute long survey. It can be 5 questions.
It can be really simple.
And that can really, really give the employer something to move forward with. And then the third is, I think across generations, whether you're looking at the traditionalists, baby boomers, or the Gen Zs that are coming in, work-life balance. I think that is a benefit that can be addressed that could have a really, really, really strong impact on the overall generational aspect of the workforce.
So it's really interesting that you say that that is a benefit, because I know, we have the audience that usually listens or watches this are experienced professionals, right? They're senior leaders that are looking for better ways to attract and hire and retain top young professional talent. Experienced leaders sometimes struggle with this concept of work-life balance, because really it was the millennials that kind of built this up. And now we're actually starting to see this life over work mentality among some of the younger workforce members, so Gen Z, which is essentially work-life balance, right? So it's very interesting that you're putting it in the same bucket as a benefit. And I think if that perspective is changed and leaders understand that it is a benefit, it's not just like this term that people coined and they want balance. Like, I think it has to come from leadership, right? And so claiming it's a benefit, I think, can actually be a really shift in the positive direction. What do you think?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. One of the first things that I talk with my clients about is where their leadership champions are. If they don't have that, it becomes a little bit harder for them to increase engagement in their great benefit plan, their great well-being programs. You could have the greatest benefits and the greatest program, but if you don't have that leadership support, it just becomes harder to be successful. So I would highly suggest that somebody finds finds that kind of champion within the workplace. And then even little things like in a benefit guide. So employers who are listening out there, within your benefit guide, where does well-being and your work-life balance, like PTO, volunteer hours, et cetera, where does that fall in your benefit guide? When do you talk about that? Is it on the last page? Or is it on the first page? So there's little things like that, we, in my organization, we help our clients understand that it doesn't need to be this grandiose thing. It can be simple changes that really create something extraordinary.
Yeah, I love that. And let's kind of keep that thought moving because I want to come back to that. But let's talk about differences across generations because we know that there are some, right? There's absolutely some similarities. I think everybody at the end of the day wants a little bit of balance no matter how old you are, right? But let's talk about from the perspective of company leaders who are watching and listening this episode. Are there differences across generations in what they can offer their teams in the form of wellness and benefits? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yes. The simple answer is yes. The generations are different. I think for all generations, though, what we've talked about so far works for all of them. Listening, work-life balance, maximizing benefits. And if you do those things, you will find that you probably already have a lot of what's needed for the different generations. Yeah. And I used 401k and EAP as an example. If you think about that in the context of each of the generations, a 401k vendor is for retirement, right? And so every generation, hopefully, is saving for retirement. But then when you dig into what that benefit offers, you find that there's will preparation and estate planning. That's probably really great for our millennials and our baby boomer generation if they haven't done that already. It has financial consultation for big purchases, which is really more for that Gen Z who's coming up into the workforce. So, doing the things that we've already talked about can really help also plot along the generational
like stages, right?
Exactly.
Stages almost.
To see what you have and then what's needed. Yeah. And so short answer is yes. Longer answer is we've talked about ways to look at some benefits underneath those generational contexts. Yeah. And, I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to note, we actually talked about this in one of our episodes this season already, was looking at benefits that, again, might apply to a certain life stage, like maternity and paternity leave. Yes. Pet insurance. Like these are things that as we see the sweeping trend of more and more millennials and Gen Z not having children right away, but having pets, right? Like pet insurance might go up in the ranks. And that's not necessarily, maybe it could be tied to wellness to some people, but that is a form of benefit, right? So what are you seeing like across some of those types of benefits? Are you seeing, because I see your point about, estate planning versus coming in and like on the 401k level that makes the most sense for people that are entering the workforce. What about some of these other offerings that are a little bit more generational specific?
Yes.
And I am not an expert here, so that's why I
don't know if we have expert. I mean, there's so many factors when you look at a population and their demographics. I think what I'm seeing a lot of right now and COVID, COVID's one of those words that's kind of one we try not to talk about anymore, but it really had an impact on how we look at benefits. Yeah. It kept people home. It exacerbated what I call the sandwich generation, which is those individuals who have elders and children and pets at home with them, and they're having to take care of all of that. And what are they doing for themselves? What benefits can an employer look at to help support them? Maternity is one of them, family planning, but then caregiving. Caregiving vendors in the last 4 years have really, really, really come out of the woodwork to help individuals on a spectrum, right? Some of those vendors help with just understanding the referral process and in your zip code, what child care organizations are accepting new children, what nursing homes have high quality and cost scores. Yeah. So things like that, all the way to like having virtual caregiving as part of the benefit. So that's a big one that we've seen.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. And just on the daycare side of the house, something that I'm just starting to see really from my peers, I'm not hearing this as much through my clients' employees, but just through my peers. I'm in my late 20s and I have a lot of friends who are maybe in their 30s and they're literally at the point where they have to decide, like, this is so expensive for me to send my child to daycare that I might as well stay home and work in a different capacity than I've been working, because they have to like rethink how that, like, that's tough, right? Because then you're losing like you're going to lose talent, which is a retention problem. Not to mention you're losing really valuable people who are leaving the workforce because they physically just, it's not because of how childcare expenses are, you're just losing people. So I don't know if you have any information there or if you've noticed that at all, but I just think your caregiving perspective is a really important one, and one that we don't really talk about enough. But the childcare concept is something that I think really does impact young professionals, particularly who are, in that family planning stage. So I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
So, and I just want to disclaim here that I understand that I've worked for healthcare, I've worked for consulting firms, I've worked for retail, right? And so I wholeheartedly understand that depending on the industry we're talking about, this changes.
Yeah.
Healthcare is one of them. You have to be at work. Nurses have 12-hour shifts.
Right.
They have to go overnight. Whereas a white collar, sales and technology company may have a little bit more flexibility. But I do challenge employers to look at their flexibility in the workplace in terms of where individuals can work. Healthcare, again, is going to be one of those kind of outliers where it's going to be a little bit more difficult to figure that out. But there are ways of looking at that. But in general, offering flexible work arrangements is something that has come from the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, like for me, if I have to take a parent to a doctor's appointment on a Thursday, but I can get some work done on Saturday morning without having to take a PTO day or a vacation day, that for my mental health is so helpful.
Right.
And so that's just one example, but a lot of clients are starting to think about that now. I have a few friends who are actually in the healthcare field. They are in nursing, ICU nursing, pediatric nursing. And some of their nurse managers are doing this really well and some are just not. And so I think that also comes down to leadership.
Yeah.
Having leadership come in and say, we want you to take your breaks. We want you to tell us when you're feeling burnt out, things like that. So that comes in when we're talking about those generations that are taking care of children and their elders.
Well, thank you. I know I threw that curveball, so I appreciate you I appreciate you answering it, because I just think it's really important, and it was based on what you shared that kind of triggered that thought. You've already touched a little bit on just being in the post-pandemic era, but what I would like to know is, obviously we hear that there's a challenge in retaining young professionals. So can you talk about an example with one or more of your clients that have seen success retaining talent when utilizing proactive wellness tools? Like, is that something that you can touch on? Because I would love to know, what are some of those tangible approaches? Like, you've talked about so many, but are there any examples?
I think, again, coming back to two of the takeaways that I'm hoping individuals take from this, which is inventorying your benefits and employee listening. So not to sound like a broken record, but I think looking at those two things under the context of what you're asking is important. One of the clients that I worked with recently is a client where we helped them. And again, keeping in mind that everything that I helped them with was free. There was no added cost. It was just something that they could do and easily learn more about their population. So we did an employee survey. And what we consulted with them about is to take the data from that survey and pull out 3 to 5 trends that they're seeing. And I helped them do that. From those trends, understanding goals in terms of adding benefits or looking at benefits in a different way. So the example with this client was they were getting a lot of feedback from their employees that they needed more financial well-being support. And we recognized that they weren't utilizing their current benefits up to they weren't maximizing their current benefits and what they already had. And so it was a very easy communication from leadership. So using that leadership perspective, using the inventory, using the employee listening to then say, we heard you.
Right.
We find this very helpful and we heard you. This is what we're doing about it. And that was they got very, very good feedback from that, just because their employees felt like they had a say in the future of their benefits. And they just felt listened to.
Right. And at the end of the day, that's what we're hearing from most young professionals across the country. It's they want to be asked. If you just ask them, they're going to tell you what they think. Now, the key there as leaders, and something for those who are listening and watching to recognize, is if you're going to ask, you either need to execute or you need to tell them why you're not executing. That's kind of my golden rule, right? Because if I have my famous example, and I'll just touch on it briefly, is we know some people, this was not a client of ours, but they sent a survey out. They got the responses back. All of the young professionals in the office talked about, they were excited that they finally asked them something. And then the next day or like the next week, they came in with movie tickets. Like that was a congrats, like thanks for helping take the survey. Like, and then that was it. Nothing else came from. And one of the questions was like, what do you want as a form of recognition or a reward? Mm-hmm. And they brought in movie tickets, and everybody's like, we don't go to the movies anymore.
Exactly. It has to be meaningful.
It's a little tone deaf, right? So it has to be meaningful. But if you're not going to take results from a survey and actively apply it, you need to communicate that and share why are you not applying it. So exactly. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but one thing while you're kind of thinking about that, when we talk about proactive wellness tools, I think technology. I think how are companies utilizing technology in the benefits and wellness space? So are you seeing any changes like because of technology in this space?
Yes. I think that actually my last job, I worked for a well-being technology company for 2 years. And so it's a great segue. Yeah. And in that company, we had employers from all industries, all shapes, all sizes, all populations. Mm-hmm. And they, because of the current state of working remotely and flexible work arrangements, they were looking at how can they use technology to bring their people together. Mm-hmm. Especially the younger, going back to the younger generations, they are wanting to feel that connection. Mm-hmm. They want to feel like they are connected in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about attracting and retaining talent, they were using versus historically physical well-being, mm-hmm. Having a wearable device. We all have, iWatches or Garmin's or whatever now. Moving from steps challenges and weight loss challenges mm-hmm. to social connection, volunteerism, and how can we use technology to help support that? There's mm-hmm. a lot of technologies out there. Yeah. That's one thing that I do help my clients with is finding the right technology mm-hmm. for them. But it's also finding a technology that can integrate with their benefit admin system, mm-hmm. right? Where people do open enrollment and they look at all their benefits and they go and they do payroll and request PTO. How can we make sure that individuals who are already spending a lot of time at work in the workplace have ease of access and use of any technology we bring in?
Yeah, thank you. That's really important, again, just as we're talking about young professionals, right? They have grown up with technology. They're digital natives. So incorporating that in wellness and benefits, I think, is a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. As young professionals age, do you see their wellness preferences changing as well? So I know we've slightly touched on this and, again, just the life cycle of this next generation, but are you seeing in real time these wellness preferences change?
I think the intrinsic motivators are going to be somewhat similar mm-hmm. as they age. Somebody who in their 20s is motivated by feeling purposeful in the workplace. I think that type of intrinsic motivation is not going to change. Mm-hmm. But the type of benefits that we bring mm-hmm. based on the generation, which we've talked about a little mm-hmm. bit, is what's going to change and what they're looking for and what is going to keep them in the workplace. Mm-hmm. As these younger generations age and they get into more of that sandwich generation mm-hmm. and generations where they're looking to, what's retirement look like? Again, the intrinsic motivators are going to be the same, mm-hmm. but the extrinsic motivators, the things that the benefits, the well-being programs, things like that, the purpose behind those is going to shift. Yeah. And so again, it comes down to, I would highly suggest that employers on a yearly basis do that inventory of their benefits, look at their demographics, where is their average age, what locations are their employees in, and take a look at their benefits under that lens so that as the population shifts and changes, mm-hmm. as the generational, intrinsic and extrinsic motivators change, they're able to shift and adapt to that.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a really tangible takeaway too. So thank you. Last but not least, and I'm going to ask you after this if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to share. But just to wrap things up, Sam, this has been such a great conversation. I wish that we had much longer to discuss this topic. As this growing number of young professionals enter the workforce and the Gen Xers and baby boomer generations begin to retire, where do you see the biggest challenge in your industry or your clients' industries?
So I think staying competitive, staying relevant, staying the employer of choice, no pressure for all the companies out there who are listening. But I think that, you asked about the biggest challenges. I think that is going to remain is how can an employer remain relevant with their benefits, how they support their employees. That's going to I truly think that's going to remain the biggest challenge for employers as we move forward over the next few years and even beyond. But I think what we've talked about today, those easy things that employers can do, again, not to sound like a broken record, but inventory, employee listening, those sorts of things can really help those companies stay competitive, understand what they're needing to do for their employees, and staying relevant is really going to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you've brought up some really insightful takeaways that I think people listening and watching can actually start applying. And I love having that annual check-in. I think that's really critical. Is that something that companies can do internally, or do they have to bring in external partners for that? What does that look like?
I think that it's something that obviously, I've seen this, especially post-COVID world. HR and benefit teams are lean.
They're so lean.
They're having to do 18 different jobs, including being a wellness coordinator and being a benefits coordinator and doing all these things. This is where I come in and really, I hope, bring value to my clients is I help them with employee survey questions. I help them with trends and best practices. What are the best questions to ask? Inventorying them and then bringing in ideas for new benefits or how do we leverage existing benefits. So I think, this is where a broker, an advisory person, a consultant can come in and truly help their client. But in reality, it's something you can do internally.
Right.
You just have to be intentional about it and spend time with it and know that it's not going to be – it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's not something that's going to take – one day and then decisions made. It's going to take some time.
Right. Well, just to mention one of your comments, you hope you bring value. I absolutely imagine that you do based on having a conversation with you today. So is there anything else that you want to share that we haven't touched on today, Sam?
There was a quote that I would like to read. I know I don't want to read off paper, but
no, you absolutely can.
There's a betterup.com article that I read in preparation for today, and it says generational diversity is a competitive advantage when you treat everyone's strengths and weaknesses with respect and care, and when you find value in everyone's perspectives, you'll see stronger teamwork, productivity, and creativity. And I think that sums up what we've talked about today is we want to look at our population as a whole population and what benefits our population as a whole. But then, how do we start to recognize the differences in the generations without getting overwhelmed and thinking you have to do everything at once. But I just thought that you'll see the stronger teamwork, productivity, creativity, and that generational diversity as an advantage versus a disadvantage. I think if we can shift that mindset and start to do some of these things, it'll really benefit employers.
Yeah, and that is not to segue it to YoPro, but that is what we do. That's why we're here. We help companies bridge the gap because it is an advantage. It's not a disadvantage. So I think that's wonderful, and we love a guest who prepares. So thank you. I love that quote, and I love that you brought that. I think that's a really wonderful way to wrap up this episode. Sam, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for joining us on The Great Retention with Camber Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the workforce today and are expected to jump at a rapid pace in this decade. What will you do to help them become the great leaders we need for the future of our workforce? Join us next time for more information on how to recruit, develop, and retain top young professional talent. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others who are interested in this topic find us and more episodes. And last but not least, don't forget to share with your coworkers. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.